Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, inshallah, we're going to be continuing the whole series that we had started with some while ago, which is when we're talking about morality. And we said that the main causes of immorality are four different elements. We talked about injustice in general. We also talked about oppression. We also talked about ignorance or arrogance. And today, inshallah, we're going to be talking the fourth element of immorality. In other words, the different cause and motivation that causes immorality without us realizing is really anger. So although I said anger in Islam, but it's really going to be talking about the different things and where one, what is anger, two, is anger always necessarily a negative thing, and number three, answering the question when we're talking about anger, how do we actually help ourselves go through the therapy of removing anger from it impacting us into taking us into the wrong end. And of course, when we're speaking about anger, there's always a lot to talk about, but it's really important to look at the different sides of anger. There is positive anger, but how far is positive anger, and when can we do and engage in positive anger? Is there such a thing as positive anger? We'll also be talking about that. The negative anger is really the biggest focus that we're going to be focusing on, because negative anger, it urges you and pushes you to transgressing principles and definitely not considering people's rights and justice. And it pushes you and urges you to forget the good things that surround you, and definitely leads to crime. SubhanAllah, when you work in prisons and you see that a lot of these people, they're easily provoked. Easily provoked when it's really, I'm sure there are different psychology studies in studying the what leads to crime and the psychology of these people that are imprisoned. And most of the times, one of a very common thing is that they're easily provoked. They're just ready to punch, they're ready to hit, they're ready to yell, they're ready to use illicit words. They're just easily on the edge every single time. And that's definitely one thing that you would find in common in what led to a lot of these people in that prison and in that cell. So what is anger really? So I got this dictionary right there. Strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, and hostility. When you look at the strong feeling of annoyance, this is not really different from the way that different Muslim scholars had actually defined anger, and even the scholars of fiqh, hadith, etc. When they defined and talked about anger, they talked about that strong annoyance feeling. You're annoyed. It could be for relating to probably your own pride, or probably because you're angry that somebody transgressed the limit, stepped on your toes. You're feeling, and of course that develops a feeling of hostility. You're anger, you want to fight back, you feel that you need to stop this, so you start acting in a way to ensure that it's not going beyond, because you feel some type of insecurity. And this type of insecurity brings in and provokes in this anger, because the person wants to push whatever they feel is actually targeting them. So, anger, of course, the way Muslims defined it, when you look at the way they had defined it, is really not much different than what that definition in that dictionary was defining it as. So, when you look at, for example, in the definition, let's just look at Al-Qurtubi right there. So, Al-Qurtubi was actually a very important scholar, by the way. Al-Qurtubi is one of the scholars that used to live in Al-Andalus, which is Spain today. Al-Qurtubi, from his name, Qurtuba. Cortoba, of course, was that city in Al-Andalus, and actually has the one of the, I would say, biggest tafsirs. And we're right there. I actually see it right in front of me. It's in, let me see, 21. I'm just looking at it right now. 21 volume. Well, it's in 11 volumes, but 21 different segments for it, and he's got the biggest tafsir. All right, so one of the biggest tafsir, it's called the Jam' al-Ahkam al-Quran, which really combines all the different things all the different ayat. It focuses on the different ayat that relate to legislature. All right, so anyhow, let's look at Cortobi and what he said. He said that ghadab in literally means a type of stress. ورجل غضوب أي شديد الخلق. A person that is angry, in other words, a person that's always stressed, is basically a person that's always tight on himself. And al-ghadub, al-hayyatul khabitha. And another word and another name for al-ghadub, a person that is al-ghadub, is really another word that is used for describing a venomous snake. All right, and it's really important to look at these things, how the Arab, or even how it was perceived, even from the way that they would look at the different things around them. So in other words, a venomous snake, and where the person, there are these commonalities between a person that's angry and a venomous snake. So a venomous snake, you may see it as beautiful and colorful on the outside, but what it contains is really venom that will attack you and probably be fatal. And that's the same thing. And where deep on the inside, they contain all that venom. Deep on the inside, they may actually be the most venomous people in the world that surround you, and may actually commit a crime without you realizing. So when you look at the way the Arab used to look at the words and and even name the names, it's really interesting how they saw the resemblance within a snake and venom, and the resemblance and that comparison between a person that is angry, that is easy to attack you at any time. And the other thing is that it definitely is. So here's that التعريفات right there, in where they said that it is تغير يحصل عند فوران دم القلب ليحصل عنه التشفي في الصدر. So they said right there, so I'm just pointing out right there, they said it is basically the change that happens when a person's heart is filled, of course, with, they here said filled with blood. In other words, the person's getting high blood pressure, and then they would feel that they want to retaliate in order to reduce their anger. In other words, it's a sense of insecurity that a person feels on the inside, in where they start getting that high blood pressure, that anxiety, and then they want to start attacking the person in front of them, because they feel that insecurity, and then they feel that they need to retaliate and attack in order to maintain their security. So same thing when Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali. Ibn Rajab, by the way, he was actually one of the main scholars of al-Hanbali madhab, and Ibn Rajab, by the way, died at age 45, so a very young man, but he was one of the greatest scholars. And it's actually really interesting to look at those scholars that died at an early age, and yet left behind great ilm and great knowledge. So he said, 45 to me is young, very young. All right, mind you, I'm actually close to that age. So الغضب هو غليان دم القلب المؤذي عنه خشية وقوعها أو طلب الانتقام. So pretty much the same thing, in where he said they're focusing on that area in where the person is trying to retaliate, the person is trying to bring about security to himself. So what do? They might actually attack in different immoral ways, or different haram ways, or ways that are not permissible. In other words, attack, whether involved in language, or probably get involved in certain behaviors that involves some form of transgression, and attack on the people by probably killing, hitting, and of course in other ways of transgression and attacking and aggression. So we're looking at transgression, we're looking at aggression, and definitely we're also looking at from the oral and of course behavioral parts, in where when we're talking about oral, you're seeing the person starting to swear, use some type of illicit language, and it may even get to the level of probably reaching the level of kufr and committing kufr, meaning the person may actually leave Islam and start doing takfir or kufr, and of course starting to probably probably get themselves out of the fold of Islam just because they were concerned about their own security. They were concerned about their own selves, not realizing that they had passed the level of principle. Now, what develops anger, or what does anger develop? So, anger develops generally a hostile feeling towards the person you're angry from, and provokes different feelings of anxiety. And what provokes anger? Well, what provokes anger are actually four different things. Number one is pride, show off. We're going to talk about each and every single one of these. Joking and banter and teasing others, or pranking. We're going to talk a lot about that. And illicit speech. So the first one, when we're talking about pride, why did we actually focus on pride in the beginning? Well, remember when we said that anger is really motivated by insecurity, and a sense of insecurity on the inside? Well, that's the same thing, in where when a person feels that their pride is being attacked, that's when they start feeling one, that they have to actually bring security to their own pride. Well, what brings in the pride? When the person is centered around their achievement and belittling others' achievements. So they're centered around, I did, and look at what I'm going through, look at this. And sometimes it's really important, although here we mentioned being centered around one's own pride, there are others that might actually get angry when they're actually centered around their own pains. They're not feeling others' pains, but they're only feeling their own pains, and they're only self-conscious on the things that they have, and or self-conscious on, even, it's really strange. You could even only feel your pains, and there are these types of people that only feel their pains. If you talk about, for example, others' pains, they will always focus on their pains, like no one. They're always complaining, like no one can ever go through what they went through. No one is at all, facing the harm that they're facing. They're the ones that are suffering the most, or on the other side, they're the most ones on the other side, meaning the other types of people. The other types of people in where no one achieved as much as they did. They're the ones that managed to go beyond all the challenges, and no one else was capable of going beyond the challenges. And of course, they're always attributing all the different successes that they might have passed to themselves, and not necessarily sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, not always, not sometimes, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really is the one that gives one success. But maybe there are different elements, there are different circumstances that allowed such successes to happen, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might have given you probably a certain let's say a certain character with inside of you that you didn't really create for yourself. Or maybe the circumstances in where you just happen to, come across maybe a good job, or maybe teachers or professors or whatever it is, or even a supportive spouse, etc. All these different things, you may not realize that they were really those hidden and incognito soldiers that were really surrounding you, whether they were people or even circumstances. But of course, many times pride, in fact, not many times, but pride could be that hidden feeling that may motivate one into getting that pride, into getting that anger whenever they're feeling that their pride is being attacked. And of course, when we're looking at pride, it's always that deep feeling of satisfaction, and because they're focused on their own achievements. Now, pride, the Prophet ﷺ actually focused on pride a number of times, because pride is a type of arrogance. In fact, pride develops arrogance. And the Prophet ﷺ actually said, لا يدخل الجنة من كان في قلبه قال ذرة من كبر. The hadith, you could see, is actually narrated in Sahih Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ says, no one that has any iota, in other words, the smallest element, an atom of pride, will not enter Jannah. Why? Well, that's because when they go in pride, that's when that pride will blind them from implementing principle, from acting justly, and definitely from living morality. And the Prophet ﷺ actually said, I love this hadith. Let's look into it, all right? We're going to do it. So the Prophet ﷺ, oh my God, when when you read this hadith, you just gotta live with it. It really speaks of our time today. So let's see. The Prophet ﷺ said, "ائتمروا بالمعروف وتناهوا عن المنكر حتى إذا رأيت شحا مطاعا وهوى متبعا ودنيا مؤثرة وإعجاب كل ذي رأي برأيه فعليك نفسك ودع أمر العوام." What does that mean? So the Prophet ﷺ says, order for what is good and forbid evil. تناهوا عن المنكر. This is actually, when you look at the word tamiru, it's actually making it in a congregational type. So in English, just gonna, order for what is good. It doesn't really give the word that that the meaning of what it means in Arabic, because in Arabic, it's like a group order, it's a congregation type of, really similar to tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bil sabr, in where it's ordering people in congregation to support one another on truth and support one another in forbidding evil, and of course supporting one another in even maintaining and supporting one another in maintaining patience. So when you look at this hadith, it says تناهوا عن المنكر. In other words, embrace, and all of you live that morality that is in where you would order one another. You would order one another to maintain morality, to maintain halal, to maintain the principles of Islam, until, look at this one, until you see shuhan muta'an, until you see selfishness actually leading people, motivate, and hawan muttaba'an, and desire being people's urges. In other words, what urges people is really their own desire, and of course, and life being the purpose. And وَإِعْجَابَ كُلَّ ذِي رَأْيٍ بِرَأْيِهِ. And when you see each one proud of his own opinion, then focus on yourself and leave the others matters. So what does that really mean? This is really our time today, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is actually, this is really a prophecy of what are some of the signs of Judgment Day. Some of the signs of Judgment Day, in where what is, this is really speaking about individualism. This is talking about that pride, and you could see where it's what is really motivating people into their purposes. It's really their selfishness. It's only their selfishness, and then their desires are the main thing that they focus. And of course, right now, in where it's all about, well, just look at yourself and consider yourself and don't worry about others. And of course, it's each one so focused on their own opinion. Well, does that actually mean that we should just leave people and not actually relate to them? Because, hey, this is a sign of Judgment Day, and that really is the case during our time today. Well, this is really important to answer, because Imam al-Khattabi, who actually had a book, it's in 6 volumes, almost 5 volumes, and he actually did a sharh, which basically is explaining all Sunan Abu Dawud, and he had another book called Al-Uzla. So Imam al-Khattabi, he says, well, when do you actually have the right, when we're looking at the end of times, to actually, let's say, ostracize yourself from people? Well, that should not leave. So when you want to ostracize yourself from people, because people have generally are generally starting to live that immorality, in where what motivates them is really selfishness. What motivates them is really their own opinion, their own desire, etc. Well, that should not leave you from doing these 3 different elements. Number 1, you should not leave Jum'ah prayer and say, well, they're not listening to me anymore. You should not leave the congregation prayer in the masjid. And of course, when you want to choose your friends, you got to be really intricate. You got to be really particular in who you actually choose as a friend. And even when you deal with the people, you want to make sure that you don't choose the friendships and your friends based on your own personal desire, but you actually choose them based on the principle that they maintain. Because at the end of the day, you always need a person that will scrutinize you in some ways to help you develop good characteristics. And of course, you want to make sure that you don't engage in entertainment so much, because when you engage in entertainment, that is going to get you out of being concerned and the concern over akhirah, to only wanting to fulfill desire without you realizing you're actually going to be part of those people that you were trying to distance yourself away from them. So the other part is that even when you decide to ostracize yourself from people, you still have to say the truth, even when others ignore you. This is really important to mention, because even if you are to say you want to ostracize yourself, you don't feel good in being around people, you still have to do your part of ordering what is good and forbidding what is evil. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا عليكم أنفسكم لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم. You have to focus on yourself and don't let those that are leading to misguidance misguide you. But at the end of the day, you still have to maintain your piece of ordering for what is good. In other words, you can't stay passive. You have to engage in some form of activism in where you still, even if people are not finding the charisma in you, even if you're not getting all the different likes and all the different let's say people finding in you the power to speak, etc. At the end of the day, you still have to do your part, regardless of how people love you or hate you. You still have to do the right thing. Yes, it's really important to review yourself and probably change some of the attitudes, probably change some of the ways that you develop or probably deliver a message, but at the same time, don't stop because you don't have that charisma. Maybe, and here's one thing, is that a lot of times people may be attracted to charisma for looks and not necessarily for what the person and their knowledge is really carrying. So you want to just focus on that one. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually says, إن الناس إذا رأوا المنكر فلم يغيروا أوشك أن يعمهم الله بعقاب من عنده. The Prophet ﷺ actually said, if people see wronghood and they don't change it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is really near to embracing them, well, not embracing them, but filling them and pouring over them a punishment that will be sent from him. So when we look at those different things, we cannot ostracize ourselves fully. What about our own family members? Well, we did talk about that before, and we said that the ayah says, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that that إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders for justice, and if you cannot get to justice, your brothers are not doing their job, and you wanted to do your job as, let's say, a sister or a daughter, well, in that situation, even if your brothers, even though they're responsible to do certain jobs, but they're not doing their role, you do the ihsan, you do that level of ihsan that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you for. And at the same time, وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ, and the Lord Almighty forbids transgression, aggression, and oppression. So all these three different elements, we talked about it before. So what is the basis of pride? Why do people actually have pride? Well, they focus on themselves, the needs, and the achievements. When you focus just on yourself and your needs and achievements, so what do we mean by needs? Well, your need, when a person focuses on their need, their selfishness, and of course only caring about personal needs and whatever somebody else needs, to them it doesn't matter. It's only fulfilling what I need. And of course, following the desires and not caring about others' matters is always the main base, the main base for pride, in where others don't matter, but the person is only caring about their own selves, in where they only see their pains, only see their, and this is really important to talk about the narcissists, because narcissists are really living within this. They are just toxic people that may surround you. And of course, if it's a husband, ya Allah, it's horrible. And alhamdulillah, I don't live in this. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Rabbi. All right, so Ibn Abbas actually narrated a hadith. When you look at an Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma marfu'an, when you see the word marfu'an, it actually means that Ibn Abbas, this is not most likely, let's say it that way, most likely this is not really the wording of Ibn Abbas, but most likely this is actually the wording of the Prophet ﷺ. So, and why did it say anhuma? Because Abdullah ibn Abbas, who's actually the Prophet ﷺ's cousin, but there's definitely a huge age difference between Abdullah ibn Abbas and the Prophet ﷺ, although he's actually a first cousin for the Prophet ﷺ. When the Prophet ﷺ died, Abdullah ibn Abbas was only about 13 or 12 years old. So Abdullah ibn Abbas actually grew up learning from the Prophet ﷺ directly, right? So he grew up learning from the Prophet ﷺ directly, and he was actually learning a lot of different things, and the Prophet ﷺ actually made the dua for him, where he said, Allahumma faqihhu fi din wa alimhu ta'wil. Oh Allah, give him and grant him, that is referring to Abdullah ibn Abbas, grant him the knowledge and the ability to interpret, in other words, derive rulings from the deen. And even the older Sahaba would even come to Abdullah ibn Abbas, even though he was only approximately 13 and in his teenage, but he was one of those Sahaba that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had granted him great insight in learning the deen. So anhuma, because Ibn Abbas, Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet ﷺ's uncle, who is the father of Abdullah ibn Abbas, was actually the Prophet ﷺ's, like I said, uncle. All right, so he actually said marfu'an, which means that most likely these are the words of the Prophet ﷺ directly, and not necessarily Ibn Abbas. But Ibn Abbas didn't necessarily say that this is what the Prophet ﷺ said. So he said, Al-muhlikatu thalath. So three things will actually lead you to destruction. Destruction meaning, al-muhlikat meaning in akhirah, meaning in dunya as well. They'll lead you to getting destructed by your own sins, in where sin will bury you to the point that it will actually lead you to hellfire. Three things. One, إعجاب المرء بنفسه وشح مطاع وهوى متبع. He said three things will actually lead you to destruction. Number one is pride in your own self, in following your own selfishness and following your own desires. Now, I want you to look at the word hawan muttaba. Hawan muttaba is actually involving two things. When we talk about desire, it starts out with an inner feeling, but then it becomes into a practice. It becomes into a behavior. It develops a certain type of a behavior in where the person, all they're trying to plan is really just different ways to feed their own desire, to feed their own what is the word that I could use, to feed their own purpose, to feed their own what is the word that I could use, their own patterns. In other words, what leads to feeding probably a good job for them, or probably grades, or probably fame, or whatever it is. It becomes their main focus. Now, even though we could say it right there, yes, isnadun da'if, yes, it is a weak chain of narration, but you could see that it really supports a lot of the different things that we actually talked about. So not always, if we see an isnad da'if, it doesn't always mean that you don't want to take in that hadith. So just to mention that. So self-pride, Jahiliyyah, when you look at Jahiliyyah, which is of course al-hamiyat al-jahiliyyah, and that is really focusing on the person's security, sense of security, whether it's their own selves or their own family, and they're just concerned about their matters. But when it comes to other people's matters, they will step over them. They don't care. All right. And exaggerating personal achievements. I want you to look at this hadith. This hadith. It's although yes, you could see that it's mentioned in Zuhd, the book of Zuhd, and the book. A lot of these books don't necessarily contain authentic hadith, but it's okay to mention them. So جاء يحيى بن زكريا. So this is a story that Yahya, which is Prophet Yahya, he came and found Prophet Isa alayhi salam. All right, and then he said, "Tell me بما يقرب من رضا الله. Tell me what will get you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being content over you, and what keeps you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's anger." So Prophet Isa responds, abstain from anger. قال الغضب ما يبدأه وما يعيده. He said, that is Yahya ibn Zakaria responds, what starts, in other words, what initiates anger and what restarts it, in other words, regenerates anger. And he said, he responded with three different elements that actually make anger, in other words, provoke anger. At-ta'azzuz, in other words, focusing on a person's own achievements and personal matters. Al-hamiyya. Al-hamiyya is really focusing on a personal security. And pride. Wal-'azma. Al-kibriya'u wal-'azma. It's when a person just looks at their own selves as if they are the ones to seek authority, whether it's authority in a job, authority in opinion, or getting some authority in fame and other people's focus. Now, the other thing that leads to anger is arguing and focusing on personal opinion. Now, arguing brings in hostile speech. Why arguing? Well, when you look at arguing, it's such a bad manner. And when you find yourself going into, that, I would say, constant argumentative type of personality, just learn how to stay away from the circumstances, or at least the people that you just constantly just don't get along. So arguing brings in hostile speech. Why? Because you're so focused, the person is so focused on their own opinion, that when they see somebody else proving them or attempting to prove them wrong, that's when they start feeling that sense of insecurity, and they start attacking others, because even an opinion to them is a property that belongs to them, and to prove them wrong to them, they would feel that it is bringing insecurity, at least especially in front of people. It brings in that insecurity in front of people, and of course to them, opposing an opinion is some form of a threat that they will feel is somehow weakening their pride, or weakening their authority in the eyes of the person in front of them. And the Prophet ﷺ actually said, in order to, of course, in order to teach the mu'min, teach the Muslim, like, what should you be really focusing on when you're talking about dealing with people. He says, إنكم لن تسعوا الناس لن تسعوا الناس بأموالكم. You will not be able to bring in people or embrace people with your money, because once your money goes away, people will repel away. ولكن ليسعهم منكم بسط الوجه وحسن الخلق. But what will actually attract them, what will bring people closer to you, is really bastul wajh, when you're easy to deal with, when you're giving a smile, and when you have good morality. In other words, people will feel that when they come and approach you and get closer to you, and you're giving a smile, you're being easy, you've got this husnul khuluq in your speech and your behavior, that's when people will give you security, and will also feel secure. And there's no way that you can get security if you're not giving it to others. This is really important. When you are constantly attacked, well, you're making others not feel secure, and that's why they're attacking back. The Prophet ﷺ actually said in a hadith, all right, so you could see Rawahu Abu Dawud, and this hadith is by Abu Umama. He said, أنا زعيم. So this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, I guarantee a house on the outskirts of paradise for the one who refrains from arguing, even if he's right, and a house in the middle of paradise for the one who refrains from lying, even if he's joking, and a house in the highest part of paradise for the one who perfects his manners. When you look at this one, and I love this part about the hadith, in where, yes, you will get the rabadul jannah. Rabad is like the main piece of Jannah, all right? Whoever leaves ترك المراء وإن كان محقا. Those that leave arguing, even when they're right, you can deliver the message. Sometimes you just got to give the person the time to process the idea that you wanted to support, the evidence. Sometimes just give them time, especially men. They tend to be more stubborn, and it takes them time to process the ideas. I'll say it that way. You can call me whatever you want, but it takes men more time to process ideas than women. And at the same time, it can be a negative way, in where women sometimes they can be easily manipulated because they process things faster than they should be processing, and that's why they could easily get manipulated and easily become victims to a lot of different things. Sisters, please and please, when you want to get married or when you go into an argument with your husband, please involve your wali with it in this problem, and please get your awliya to help you take and make second opinions. As women, you can call it misogyny, call it whatever you want. I see this all the time, in where women tend to be faster in making the decisions and then regretting making the decisions, because most of the times they're actually based on emotion and not based on the time to look at the pros and the cons in decision making. Call it misogyny, call it whatever you want, but you can call it my anecdotal side, my experience with dealing with family problems. All right, pranking and teasing, or pranking, teasing, and joking and banter, or I could say pranking, teasing, joking, and banter. Yeah, this is proper English. So pranking, although yes, we see it all the time on those pranking videos and Adam Saleh and all those, they may be fun to watch, but it's really important to actually explain that the Prophet ﷺ said, in this hadith, you could see, لا يأخذن أحدكم متاع صاحبه جادا ولا لاعبا. The Prophet ﷺ forbid that anyone would take somebody else's property, even if that person, whether they were in a state of being serious or whether they were jokingly taking it. In other words, it was a prank, or making it as if it was a fun thing to do. Well, here's the thing, is that such a prank, even though you will be returning that person's property or item, but it really develops anger, because the person, first, is not aware that that's a prank. Two, that actually develops a lot of anger, and sometimes, in fact, most of the times, you may not really know what this will result into. Provoking somebody's anger and putting their anger or their fears or probably their humor on the spot, under the pretense of teasing them and testing and watching them and making videos of how far they could go, is not funny at all. It's not funny at all. We are human. We are human, and it really leads to anger that may result into definitely a very, very dangerous consequence. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was actually described as the fifth Khalifa, even though he was actually in the era of Al-Umayyin, during the Umayyad era. But because even though he only ruled for 2 years, by the way, but Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was actually described as the fifth Khalifa because of his justice. Now, mind you that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, his ancestry from his mother's side, not his father's side, because his father's side is actually an Umayyad ancestry, but his mother's side, it is actually from his father, from his mother's side, it actually goes all the way to Umar ibn al-Khattab. All right, Umar ibn al-Khattab. So what did he say? Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was even I would say brought up in Medina by Umar ibn al-Khattab's tribe, by Umar ibn al-Khattab's family, and of course Asim ibn Abdullah ibn Umar al-Khattab is basically his lineage. All right, so إياكم والمزاح فإنه يجر القبيح ويورث الضغينة. What did he say? You know, his hikmah, his wisdom. He said إياك والمزاح, stay away from pranking. Stay away from teasing and joking. Why? Because it will lead to something ugly, and it will develop hatred and animosity on the inside, because you're putting that person in a place of ridicule. You're putting that person in place to make others laugh. You're making him look, or her of course, making them look as silly and making them look stupid, and it becomes, according to you, funny, but realistically speaking, you just put them as a place for mockery and others looking at them as if it was funny, and it's not funny. And that's why the poem, the poet actually said, "Inna al-muzaha bid'uhu halawa." Al-muzah, teasing and joking, it starts with, with entertainment, but at the end it actually leads to animosity, and it leads to bringing in tension, and it leads to eventually leads into bringing hatred, animosity, and definitely the person becomes an enemy. And of course, the one that is of honor, he will get angry in supporting probably his honor. So you might actually think of it, oh, let's see how funny this person is, by making the person that usually is actually a person of honor, and you're just laughing about their honor. And then the person that is sakhif, the person that is trivial, they will start transgressing the limits of others under the pretense that we're just mocking, we're just gaining, it's just a prank. Well, pranks are usually done to bring laughter, but Maymun ibn Mahran, look at this name, Maymun ibn Mahran. Remember this, the guy that we just talked about, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz? Well, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he was a Khalifa. So he actually had a special person to raise and discipline his own children. And that was Maymun ibn Mahran. Maymun ibn Mahran was actually a scholar. And later, Maymun ibn Mahran was actually a major leader in leading a battle towards Greece and Cyprus. All right, so he was a mujahid wanting to deliver Islam all the way to Greece and Cyprus. All right, he said, إذا كان المزاح أمام الكلام إمام الكلام كان آخره اللطم والشتام. What happened? He said, if joking and pranking is really, when we say amam al kalam, it's like the beginning, or the entertainment in a discussion, or the entertainment in any type of talk and speech, well, that will eventually lead into latm. Latm meaning it's going to lead to a lot of remorse, and of course a lot of shitam, a lot of profanity and illicit talk, because the person is going to probably name call the other person. And this is what Maymun ibn Mahran was teaching, of course, Umar bin Abdul Aziz's children. And that was the adab. And this is part of the adab that we learn. Don't prank and think it's funny and silly, because you're really looking at the consequence. It's really going to lead to ugliness. It's going to lead to people abusing one another, and people swearing at one another. It's not funny. Just give it up. Profanity and illicit language is another reason for anger. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَبْغَضُ الْفَاحِشَ الْبَذِيءَ. So the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَبْغَضُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes the person that uses profanity. I don't think there's anything more than profanity and illicit speech. Uglier than that. I think that's the most thing that I hate. Being in growing up in public schools, it was so common that you would hear, these bad words and illicit speech, but it was so ugly. It always just hurt me. I was always not comfortable around this type of language. Subhanallah, alhamdulillah, I just cannot handle it. And the Prophet ﷺ actually said, you could see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes the person al-fahish. Al-fahish, al-fuhsh and al-badha'a a little bit similar, and in some ways they're actually different, because al-fuhsh is when you're describing something that is normally supposed to be private. In other words, whether you're talking about bathroom or you're talking about, different body parts or different body discretions or whatever it is, and or even different private moments, let's say it that way, private things that are to be done. All right, when a person uses those descriptions in order to, let's say, whether expose someone or whether to attack someone with such language, or to belittle others, and somehow basically attribute them with animal words or animal names, or even things like attribute them with matters that weaken their pride or weaken their appearance or stuff like that. That is actually fuhsh. Bada'a, on the other hand, is more describing, so really similar to the different letters of those different words that you guys know what I'm talking about, and it describes private things, or describes illicit behavior, or illicit or even private things, or disgusting things, or disgusting things, and starts speaking about them and bring it to the face of someone. So this is, attacking them with such words. There's nothing uglier. It does not befit. The Prophet ﷺ actually said, ليس المؤمن بالطعان ولا اللعان ولا الفاحش ولا البذيء. The Prophet ﷺ said, a believer, ليس المؤمن بالطعان, does not does not attack others, in other words, attack them in mentioning their weak elements, or mentioning weak things about them. ولا اللعان, and does not damn things, does not curse things all the time, even if it's a table, or even if it's a door that you just couldn't close, or whatever it is. Don't damn things. ولا الفاحش ولا البذيء, which is what we just described right there. The Prophet ﷺ says, ليس المؤمن, a believer does not engage in such a behavior whatsoever. It does not befit a believing person. If you are constantly using that type of language, well, you have to start working. You have to start working on ways to bring in the therapy to yourself, because when you start using that language, well, that actually means you're constantly not recognizing that you are going up the levels of anger too fast, in where you don't even give yourself the chance to review what your tongue is saying, let alone your actions. So your behavior for sure is going to be transgressing a lot of different red zones. It's going to be attacking so many different people. Renaming the realities of things brings in, of course, manipulation, and also motivates a lot of anger as well. Al-Ghazali, when did Al-Ghazali die? Al-Ghazali died 505 Hijriya, and Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali, even though, look at this, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali grew up in Iraq, and lived for some time in his life in Palestine, in the Masjid al-Aqsa. All right, al-Ghazali grew up as an orphan. Both his mother and father died, and him and his brother, they had no place to go but an orphanage. And the orphanage, in order to be part of that orphanage, you have to attain school. If you don't attend school, you can't be part of that school. So he said, we just went to school really for the sake of getting a shelter, getting food and water and shelter. He said, and later, of course, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali becomes the pioneer, in fact, the leader of the Nizamiya school in Baghdad. And later he says, we had seek the knowledge for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but knowledge refused but to be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he teaches, and by the way, he wrote the book Ihya Ulumuddin, reviving the sciences of religion. And it's 6 volumes, 7 volumes, all right, in the print. Definitely a book, if you actually have with Tahqiq al-Iraqi with it, as to tell you which hadith is authentic and which is not, it's actually really important. But at the same time, to learn from the book Ihya Ulumuddin is extremely important, because it teaches you a lot of what you don't really learn in fiqh. Because in fiqh, the focus is really on legislature. So that's why in fiqh, many times it becomes as if it's really, I would say, like stiff words, right, wrong. It doesn't really focus on the spirituality of the behavior and why it's good, why it's important. It doesn't motivate you necessarily, because that's not what it's focused on. It's more of a legal term that it uses, sahih, batil. It will use the legal term and not necessarily the inspiration of it. So Al-Ghazali recognized that people were focusing on the elements of do and don't, and that they lost the insight, they lost the inspiration of things. And then he actually wrote that Ihya Ulumuddin, in order to revive like the way you perceive the deen. You really need to focus on the heart, on the core. So he talks about a lot of the different akhlaq. So a lot of what I'm actually using in the different lectures are actually part of what is taught in Ihya Ulumuddin. I always go back to it, definitely. And he said, "Min ashad al-bawa'ith alayh," from the main motives, the main things that motivate and instigate anger, that is. So alayh is really referring to anger. عند أكثر الجهال تسميتهم الغضب شجاعة ورجولية وعزة نفس وكبر همة. Okay, wakibarihim, actually. So what did he say? He said one of the main things that actually lead and motivate to anger is really when they manipulate and call and redefine and relabel the different things with different meanings. So they will call, for example, anger as if it was courage, or even some type of masculinity, or even some type of izzat nafs. It's like a person's honor, and they're just preserving their honor and protecting, and that no one would transgress their honor. When in reality, what it is, it's really nothing but a person losing their akhlaq, a person losing their morality. And calling anger as power, or defining it as strength, is really that. It's really that. It's really manipulating yourself by letting that renaming and relabeling things when that's not what they really are, or calling anger as pride, or even profanity as cool and being humorous. And I remember, though, so many times I would get phone calls of, it's really sad when you would get somebody like wanting to ask for a fatwa, and then they would not recognize that using, I'll just call it different letter words, all right? You guys know what I'm talking about, within a question, where, it really hurts me when a person is asking a question like, you cannot use such language in court, you cannot use such language in school, and etc. Then you should at least respect when you're asking a question, or at least, this is the least of it, is that when you're asking for a fatwa, to respect the person in front of you's ear and be professional, at least when you're asking a question. It's not being cool when you're using the different letter words, let's say it that way. It's not having a sense of humor when you are sitting together and each and every single word the person is actually using, different letters. Even if this is on social media, it's not appropriate to use like the different letters, out there. And you will see, people with beards, or men with beards, or even shuyukh, and or even hijabis, and think that, oh, it's basically making a sense of humor and being cool. It is not cool. It is being cruel without you realizing. It's actually embracing a non-Muslim behavior. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Laysa al-mu'min," a believer cannot be such. If you're embracing that type of behavior, well, you're actually needing to review yourself. What are the different kinds of anger? So there's the positive anger. It doesn't mean that every single anger is necessarily, a negative anger, but which is why we could see, for example, in the ayah where Prophet Musa alayhi salam, the ayah says, وَلَمَّا رَجَعَ مُوسَى إِلَى قَوْمِهِ غَضْبَانَ أَسِفًا قَالَ بِئْسَ مَا خَلَفْتُمُونِي. So what is it? What happens? Prophet Musa alayhi salam goes back to his people, and he was really angry and feeling sorry because of what they had done after him. And what did they want? Well, they wanted, of course, the legislature. They wanted everything to be fast, but then Prophet Musa alayhi salam gets so angry and actually takes, even though his brother is older than him, but he starts grabbing his brother, and then his brother explains that they almost, and I was nearly getting killed by them, so don't let them start feeling shamata. Shamata is when they're feeling happy about how Prophet Musa alayhi salam are right now having somewhat of a dispute amongst one another. And of course, when you look at that, Prophet Musa alayhi salam was ghadban, was angry, not because of a personal gain, but he was angry because of the shirk that they were practicing. So because they were practicing shirk, because they started worshipping the calf, that's why Prophet Musa alayhi salam got angry. In other words, positive anger is when you're angry about matters that don't relate to you personally, but actually relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Sayyidah Aysha also explained that the Prophet ﷺ never hit anything whatsoever, not a woman and not a slave, or even a personal worker, unless it was for doing jihad for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he had never, the Prophet ﷺ would never do it for a personal cause unless this is something that is transgressing the limits for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's when the Prophet ﷺ would get angry. So you could see this hadith is actually in Sahih Muslim, and of course it refers to, well, seeing haram done. So what does that mean? If I see somebody smoking, I should just snatch it away from them and start getting angry to show that I'm just a good Muslim, attacking them. Or if I see a person using bad words, I would just scream and say, stop doing that. Well, you gotta be careful when you want to do da'wah, especially during our time today, and when we're looking at people really transgressing. You want to look at the circumstances that you are in. All right, the circumstance meaning the person, the circumstance, where are they coming from? For example, when I go to prison, that's probably the most time that, oh my God, I think I should stop going there. It really gets me a lot of anxiety. But anyhow, when going to prisons, all you really hear, these people are just so used to this low language, they can't even complete a sentence. Instead of using something, they will use another word. For every single description, you'll get a letter word coming in. They can't even complete a sentence without using these kinds of words. Subhanallah. All right. So if you are, for example, doing chaplaincy in prison, for example, and you don't recognize that these people are inside an environment that's completely toxic, in order to help these people get out of that toxic situation, you want to consider that you don't want to start with asking them to change their speech before you focus on the heart. So you gotta reevaluate. You gotta evaluate the circumstance that the person is in, where they are in their state of iman, and you also want to make sure that you don't want to forbid or stop one haram thing and probably get into a larger or probably a bigger evil. You have to use wisdom in what you want to consider first. So if, for example, stopping the child from probably playing games is going to probably lead him to going outside to play games and probably be in a more toxic environment, well, you want to reconsider on what should be my priority. So when we look at the positive anger, it doesn't mean that whenever you see haram, just go out there and start bashing or start, attacking people because they're doing haram. You gotta remember, you have to do that da'wah in a way where it is it is containing the hikmah, it is containing the wisdom, it is definitely containing also reaching out to the heart before you try to impose and enforce an argument. You want to reach out to the heart first. So this is something that's really important. And here's the thing, is that if you are capable of changing the wronghood by your authority, well then do so. But if changing it by power is going to lead into a bigger harm, so you probably stop that person from smoking, and then that person, because of not smoking, because of the tobacco in their bloodstream, they started probably getting more anxiety, more anxious. They probably just left the place, etc., and then went into a bigger harm. So in that situation, I would say you really have to study, just like a doctor would diagnose. What should I consider first? The airway, the bloodstream, etc. What should I consider first before you actually jump and start giving a medication that definitely might actually kill that person instead of actually giving them that treatment and that healing. So when we're talking about positive anger, we're talking about when you're seeing haram done, or when you're seeing rights and justice abandoned or abused. So in that situation, you have to fight back. And it's really sad to see that many times, out of I would say claiming to be calm and being wise, many have actually lost the izzah. Many lost the izzah, and subhanallah, lost the izzah in where they wanted to stay calm, but then they were overcome when they were supposed to actually start and really defend haqq right there. So they were wanting to stay calm, but then they were overcome. And then you see the rights. So for example, a person seeing a sister, her hijab pulled off. This, I don't know if I should say this, but I was in at the Sharia school, all right, and we happened to get one of the professors that was not familiar with Sharia school and how we were sitting, and the girls used to sit in the back and the boys would sit in the front. Boys meaning the guys, okay, so they're not boys, all right. So we had this professor that came from a very secular department. All right. And he came in, and this professor says, "Ladies, I want you to sit in front." All the girls stayed quiet. And I said, "We're comfortable this way. You can go ahead and start. We can hear everything. Thank you for giving us that offer." And then he said, "No, I want you ladies to move up front next to the guys." I said, "We're comfortable sitting this way. Thank you so much for your offer." And then he said, "Girls, move up front or I will not start my lecture. I want to see you in front of me." And I said, "We are comfortable this way. Thank you very much." And then he said, "Girls, move up front or I'll make you sit on the guys' laps." And boy, did my blood boil. There was a seat in front of me, and wallahi, I didn't know how this happened, but with my leg, I pushed the chair right in front of me, and it hit the wall, against the wall right behind him, and boom, it made the biggest clashing sound ever. Now, the guys, unfortunately, didn't react. Wallahi, I was so angry. They didn't react. I mean, these are Tulab Sharia. These are future Mashayikh. And he said, "Why did you do this?" And I said, "You still want a question?" And I got out of the class and boom, slapped the door at his face. All right. I don't know why I'm saying this story, but this really happened. I just couldn't hold my anger, and it's so sad that the guys didn't actually leave and didn't say anything, but to actually tell, Sharia students that I will make you sit on the guys' laps, none of them actually moved, unfortunately, and it's really sad. Everyone was supposed to move up, everyone was supposed to boycott the class, and I still say it. Everyone was supposed to do that. Unfortunately, no one actually supported me. They all left me. And everyone continued the class with him. And they didn't necessarily, I don't know exactly that the girls did actually move up. Of course, they didn't sit on the guys' laps, but it's so sad how many times, and I asked them, why didn't you guys support? You guys knew and you heard what he said. He has to understand where he is in. He has to respect the Sharia college that he's in and respect who you guys are and respect that he has to maintain akhlaq in the class. They said, I didn't want to lose my grades. SubhanAllah. And that's the thing, is that many times people will lose their izzah in fear of losing a grade, in fear of losing a job, in fear of losing probably some fame, etc. Say the haqq. Say the haqq. No matter what the situation is. That is what courage is. Courage is when you look at all the different things, even if you lose certain, let's say it, certain dunya grades, let's call it that way, but in order to maintain and fight for haqq. That is courage. Sorry, I hope people don't misunderstand the story that I had mentioned. I just remembered the story. This is not whatsoever. I have my own faults, and I just remembered the story. Please don't misunderstand why I said the story. Negative anger. Negative anger when it's against the religion, supporting as against practicing. It's so sad. You know, I work as a chaplain at St. Catherine University. The most ones to actually oppose the different steps that I do in support of the Muslim rights to speak Islam and to speak their identity are actually the Muslims. Wallahi al-azim. If I were, for example, to speak about not that Muslims don't want to use the pronouns that they're asking us to identify with ourselves with, you know, if you're a male, you're using the pronoun or whatever, all these different things, all right, or that we're not you would want to defend the Muslim rights. You will have the Muslim in the meeting, always wanting to speak about defending the sexual orientation and all that blah 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 talk. Wallahi al-azim. It is really sad to actually see that the Muslims are the first enemies to Islam. Unfortunately, it's really sad to say that. When you're opposing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principle, that is negative anger. So for example, to say we're here supporting sexual orientation and etc., and you're starting to get angry for that, or supporting feminism, and you putting in all the anger and all those feelings in support of that is negative anger. And of course, when you're opposing haqq, or probably because of a sister is wearing her niqab, it's like, this is actually causing others not to see her face and etc. Support the right of a sister to wear a niqab, or the right of a brother to have a beard, or to dress in what they see as Salafis, Tablighi, whatever it is. They want to imitate even maybe a Sunnah or whatever it is. Support a Muslim right, even if it is not the common culture that surrounds you. Support their right. Or for example, somebody is doing hifz. Let's reduce Quran classes and let's focus on mental health. I'm not degrading mental health and talking about mental health, but why on hisab? Why on Al-Quran? Quran and teaching Quran is actually teaching people mental health. It's actually part of what brings in mental health. This is أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. It will bring in that calmness, that طَمَأْنِينَ in al-qalb, which is mental health. But you can see it even in Islamic centers. This is actually happening. It's Allah al-Musta'an. Okay, now I'm getting this kind of anger. Okay, here we go. Let's stay on the permissible anger. Personal matters and not religious related. What's the permissible anger? All right, permissible anger when we're looking at your own personal matters are being attacked at that time. All right, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. So وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised the الْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظ, meaning their anger is there. but what do? They try to maintain it. So that's why الكظم الغيظ actually means those that maintain their anger, maintain their excitement, or maintain, let's say, their anger on something. والعافين عن الناس. And then the second level, they would forgive people. And then the third level, والله يحب المحسنين. And the Lord Almighty adores or loves those that are constantly giving in, or constantly muhsinin, meaning the highest level of living a principle. Now, Ibn Hibban said, وَالْخَلْقُ مَجْبُولُونَ عَلَى الْغَضَبِ. Generally speaking, it is actually part of our instinct to be angry, or even forbearing, in other words, giving in. But for those that were, unless their anger takes them out of the, let's say, the balance, and where it takes them into the wrong words or actions, and or leaving principle, that's when, and just to support themselves, that's when it becomes an impermissible type of anger. But if the person is defending their right, let's say somebody attacks their property, all right, so to actually say, well, I'm just going to give in, no, you have to defend yourself. If someone is attacking you, if someone is oppressing you, to actually give in is a form of cowardice. But you have to maintain دفع الظلم. You have to keep away oppression off yourself in order to maintain justice. So it doesn't mean accepting injustice. It doesn't mean that you're being a good person. You have to stop injustice, whether it is off of yourself or whether it is off of others. So when do I consider, all right, when do I consider forbearance, and when do I consider anger? All right, forbearance is more when you are capable, all right, when you're capable of taking your right. So let's say, for example, you've got a child, all right, you're an adult, and this is not your own child, but this is another friend's child, all right, and this friend's child probably, was walking by and spilled your cup of juice, all right. You might get angry and start like, couldn't you see and watch your step, and etc. You could probably yell at the child, or you can, and especially when their parent is not around, all right. If you maintain that anger when their parent is not around, you know that kid has no support, or probably that child can't say and speak out in defense of himself. So you know very well that you're more powerful at that moment. And you know very well that you're capable of probably not only yelling at the child, but probably even doing more. So in that situation, that is forbearance, and where you are capable of taking your rights, and you're capable of probably even attacking the person that transgressed their limit, right? So that, but then you maintain forbearance. When is it cowardice? When you are at the same level, all right? When you're at the same level, so a person and another person is at the same level, or probably even at a higher level, probably a professor, all right? This professor is right now attacking, let's say, the dean, and you are at a lesser level in terms of authority, and who knows if you can get your words to reach the dean, or get your words to reach the president of the university of how this attack happened. But definitely this professor is at a higher level. So in that situation, because he's a higher level, it would be courage to actually put the professor to his limit and actually say, you can't do that, this is not right. To put them at their own within their own premise, let's say it that way, and where they don't attack, they do not transgress the limit, not, of course, verbally or even behavior. So that's when it's actually courage, and it would be permissible anger to actually, when you're talking about people, transgressing the limit, probably taking your items, or probably stripping somebody's hijab or something like that, all right, then this is definitely permissible. In fact, It's actually, that's the jihad, and that's where it is. The levels of anger. You know what? We actually went beyond the time. So we will continue next week, inshallah. And we're going to be talking about the different levels of anger. We'll also be talking about how to suppress anger, or let's call it therapy. Let's not use the word suppress. Let's just call it anger therapy based on Quran and Sunnah. All right. So I'd be happy to. It is dry. Aisha Nicole is telling me it's dry. I hope she's not calling my lecture as dry, but that's okay. I know. I don't blame her. Even sorry, anyone, if you felt that my words were too dry. You can go ahead if there are any questions, or if somebody wanted to comment on anything, I'd be happy to listen. Yeah, maybe my words were too dry. So here we go. Aisha Nicole is calling my words too dry. Is that? It's okay. So let's practice. Let's practice our what should we call it? Our anger management right now. All right, everyone. If you have anything to say, I'd be happy to listen to it. Or if you, even the people on Facebook, you could also comment right there. I'd be happy to read them. I don't know why I don't know why I'm laughing, you guys. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I'm happy, even though it's. All right. If anybody would like to comment anything, I'd be happy to listen to it. Oh, and reference how fiqh is taught. That's okay, Aisha Nicole. I guess I misunderstood it. But I don't blame you. Even if you called my words too dry, I don't blame you. Sometimes it's like, okay, how do you make the words, especially if they're virtual, actually be live and relating to the person? Sometimes it's really hard. You know, subhanAllah, when you're virtual, it's totally different than when you're present in front of someone, because facial expressions really have their impact in creating a conversation. 80% of the conversation is really face to face. So for those that were really patient to listen, and I would say, patient and maintaining their anger in listening to my voice, thumbs up. And Allah barik fiku, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for those moments of maintaining your anger from getting angry at my words. So jazakumullah khairan. All right, that's all right, Aisha Nicole, jazakallah khairan. So if anybody, Aisha Nicole was saying, I was commenting as you were speaking, and you just saw the comment now without the context. Yeah, there you go. It happens. It really happens. That's right. And she was saying that she was actually looking at it from how, when I was talking about fiqh, and when I was talking about how dry it was being taught, and I. That's all right, Aisha Nicole. I'm sure you didn't mean it that way. And she was talking about how Ihya Ulumuddin later helped correct and take it into the right direction. Ihya Ulumuddin is one of those books that my Shaykh Yusuf Abu Snina, Allah Yajzil Khair Ya Rabbi, was always taking us to, and he was giving us those durus in Masjid al-Aqsa, in Dar al-Hadith. So we were really learning from Ihya Ulumuddin, and he was constantly, taking us into those quotes of Ihya Ulumuddin. And Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin, I believe that was translated. Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin and Ibn Qudama, it is actually translated, but it's translated and summarized. I know that for sure. I don't know what the name is called in English. I don't usually read the books in English. I go back to the original script in Arabic. I just, if you can speak Arabic, go to the original language. But yeah, that's okay. Wallahi, don't worry about it. Aisha Nicole, don't worry about it. Girl, trust me, many girls actually think my words were too dry anyway, so it's okay. All right, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And if there's anybody, let me see. So Zainab, well, I didn't know staying up late to past 2 a.m. could cause laughter. I don't know if that's the reason, but I don't know. I just feel calm, I guess, because of drinking my coffee, maybe. That brings in. And Allah barik fiku ya Rabbi. Maybe I'll always drink my cappuccino before every single class. Yeah, and they were, let me see, what is that called? Belveda breakfast blueberry cookies. Yeah, or biscuits. I don't know what they call them. Yeah, biscuits. All right, so that's what it is probably. All right, assalamu alaikum, everyone, and jazakumullah khairan. الله يحفظك يا ربي.
Recording stopped.
All right, السلام عليكم.